The scripture for today is from the lectionary. First from Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 through 20. See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I am commanding you today, by loving the Lord your God, walking in God's ways, and observing God's commandments, decrees, and ordinances, then you shall live and become numerous. And the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you do not hear, but are led astray to bow down to other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall perish. You shall not live long in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying God, and holding fast to God. For that means life to you and length of days, so that you may live in the land the Lord swore to give to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. That ends the Older Testament reading. And now from the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26. This is Jesus speaking as part of the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not murder," and "Whoever murders shall be liable to judgment." But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, "You fool," you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. May God bless to our understanding these words inspired by God. Thanks be to God. Amen. The first reading was from Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is a pivotal book. It looks both backward and forward. It portrays an Israel done with its wandering in the desert, but not yet in the promised land. Looking back, Deuteronomy recalls the ancestral promises, covenants, the Exodus deliverance, and the experiences of the people at Sinai and in the wilderness. And it looks forward to the time in the promised land and beyond. Now, Deuteronomy is about Moses' time, but it wasn't written down in Moses' time. Biblical historians say that it was written over a century or more, and with knowledge of the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile to Babylon in 587 BC, well after the time of Moses. It retells ancestral stories from the oral tradition, but as shaped by subsequent events, some of them catastrophic. This is part of the Torah, a word that means instruction. This is Moses having the talk with his people. Remember, the title of the sermon is, "Have You Had the Talk Yet?" Moses' people are no longer the youth who escaped from their adventure in Egypt. They are done with the wilderness where they wrestled with their identity in God's presence and guidance and in relative isolation. They are now, figuratively speaking, adults, subject to the influences of other peoples and other gods. The book focuses on the proper relationship between Israel and its God, essential if Israel is to have a future. Israel's very survival seems to be at stake. The instruction, although directed to these specific people, is expressly intended to apply beyond this specific historic time. Deuteronomy relates to the needs of a new generation, but it is also concerned with all of creation. It ties the moral order to the cosmic order, linking lack of faithfulness to drought, blight, insects, and turning the land into a dust bowl. The Matthew reading is from the Sermon on the Mount. It's one of the 6 antitheses in which Jesus contrasts a Jewish law with his own interpretation. It sounds like Jesus is abandoning or opposed to the Jewish law because of the form he uses. Moses said this, but I say to you this different thing. But what Jesus is doing is urging his followers to obey the law and to do so even more rigorously than the Jewish religious leaders. For example, not to murder functions to preserve the harmony of the community. But the root of disharmony that leads to murder is anger against another. So to follow the law more fully, one must obey its root intention by not becoming angry with another. Jesus' guidance here is to fulfill not only the words of the law, but its spirit as well. It is about right relationships, how to live better in community. For Matthew, the entire law at its core is a commandment to love God and one's neighbor as oneself. The lectionary texts are about orderliness in life. Moses having the talk with Israel going into the promised land. Jesus having the talk with the folks on the mount, calling them and us to follow the spirit of the law, not just the letter. That is, the golden rule. Like Israel sitting on the edge of the promised land, like Jesus' followers torn between the word and the spirit of the law, we are primed for the talk because we are at a turning point in our communal life. Global warming causing climate change poses an enormous challenge to the way we currently live. To be more precise, the challenge is to us and our children and grandchildren and so on. The changes in human life that will be experienced more by our descendants than by us. I know that I don't have to educate you about the science of global warming, so I won't. Now, I will acknowledge that there are arguments over the extent of human activity contribution to the problem, but, for example, Dr. Lee Freilich, a preeminent professor and scientist of forestry at the University of Minnesota, told us last fall at a Lunch and Learn that no credible scientist can scientifically refute the existence and increasing accumulation of greenhouse gases and their effects in causing climate to change by the warming of the earth. Dr. Freilich has already seen the results of global warming in the forests that he has been monitoring for decades. The progression of warming from south to north changes the trees that can grow in the forests of northern Minnesota. Since trees migrate very slowly, Freilich doubts that much of the northern forest will survive as it is. And still there are those who don't want to believe in global warming so they can oppose measures that will deal with global warming and its effects. In Congress, there is a very strong lobby that wants to give members reasons and excuses to not believe in global warming. I just have a trouble all the time using the term belief on a scientific matter, but one of the leaders of that lobby is the immensely wealthy petroleum company headed by the Koch brothers from Wichita, Kansas. They have a very strong influence on national policy. Acting out of what they characterize as ideological conviction and ignoring science, they oppose any proposal to regulate greenhouse gases. Their political arm, the Americans for Prosperity Foundation, spent $40 million in the 2010 election cycle, all the while emphasizing their views on climate change and energy regulation. Now, the U.S. House Energy and Commerce Committee is considering a bill that would strip the Federal Environmental Protection Agency of its ability to curb carbon emissions. Now, in 2009, the chair of that committee acknowledged the seriousness of climate change as a problem and the need for serious solutions. But he has since become a non-believer. And I say, follow the money. Look at his campaign contributions. And the Koch brothers. In the Minnesota legislature, climate change is treated the same as in the U.S. House. The State House of Representatives will vote this Thursday on a bill to repeal the current moratorium on building new coal-fired power plants. The moratorium provided that the moratorium applied unless the plant operator reduced an equal amount of carbon somewhere else. This moratorium was approved by the legislature and Governor Pawlenty in 2007 as a way to curb emissions of carbon dioxide, a major greenhouse gas. The chief sponsor of the repeal has not only challenged scientific views about global climate change, but has extolled the benefits of carbon dioxide in the environment. His statements have been thoroughly refuted by a University of St. Thomas thermal sciences professor and others, but his bill is moving through the legislature and is expected to pass in both houses. The good news is that while the big coal lobby may change both state and federal laws, the economics of big coal no longer works. From 2000 to 2009, electricity from new wind generation was cheaper than new coal generation. Right now, new natural gas generation is slightly cheaper, but wind is right behind. And the cost of new solar generation is projected to drop like a rock. But new energy generation and new laws that make for less greenhouse gases are not enough. We must respond to the spirit behind those laws. Almost every decision we make in our everyday life has a greenhouse gas and therefore global warming implications. These everyday decisions must be made using everyday ethics that are consistent with the way of God that Moses advocated and that Jesus advocated when they had the talk with their people and now with us. I want to thank Russ Adams for being here today and what he's adding to this conversation. Adapting to a changed climate and reversing climate change will require cultural and personal changes. And again, I want to mention the work done by the Mission and Social Justice Committee in this church and the Caring for Creation Subcommittee and many of you. But I want to tell you now about some of the cultural and personal changes that I've been thinking about. You can come up with many more in conversations in this church and in your family and in your neighborhoods. The local food movement is growing rapidly. It's a kind of cultural change that gives me hope in reducing greenhouse gases in the transportation sector. I've been no fan of Walmart, but even they have signed on. They have promised to double their purchase of local food in just a few years. On the personal level, we have to form a bias toward locally raised food that we eat in its season and think of new ways of doing things. For example, you can grow herbs right outside your door or on a balcony or on a porch. Now, my wife says that our chives on the south side of our porch will be up in 6 weeks. I've learned not to doubt her word. A handful of herbs, a bit of olive oil, and a favorite cheese on pasta can be a good main dish with a low impact on the earth. Just as we need a bias for locally grown food, we need a bias for compost. Composting is a big reducer of greenhouse gases. The largest part of garbage that is not recycled is compostables. You can make a composter in your yard or work together with your neighbors to make a neighborhood composter. Now, I'm treading on thin ice here, but I will say it anyway. I understand that in St. Paul you each contract for your own garbage pickup. What a tremendous addition to greenhouse gas production to have several different trucks serving each block. I was advised after I gave this sermon in the early service that there are blocks, at least one block of one member here, who have met just this last week to work to resolve that problem. Problem is how I characterize it. You can just say no to fertilizers for your yard flowers and vegetables. And folks, we have to reconsider as a society the consumption of meat at current levels. Producing each unit of meat protein creates many more times as much greenhouse gases as protein from vegetable sources. Personally, for the last several summers, my wife and I, have spent a lot of time in the garden with our 2 grandchildren. Good exercise, great homegrown food, little greenhouse gas, and a great opportunity for the talk with them in a broad sense. Now, what do we do to demonstrate that we are people of faith, cognizant of the risk we face? I am aware of a good new book. Title is Hot, Living Through the Next 50 Years on Earth by Mark Hertsgaard. I owe the title of my sermon to the New York Times reviewer of the book, a guy named Wen Stevenson. Stevenson said that he hasn't had the talk yet with his young son and daughter. That is, the talk about global warming. But then he says, quote, "We grown-ups haven't had the talk yet among ourselves. Not really. We don't seem to know how. The topic is apparently too big and scary, or perhaps, for the uninformed or misinformed, not scary enough." End quote. Folks, let's not be in either of those camps. Young people didn't vote in large numbers in the last election, yet their state and federal governments will have a huge impact for good or ill on greenhouse gases and thus on their future, a sure sign that they haven't heard the talk. The bottom line is that many things have to happen by 2020 if this planet is to remain a livable place. We have to be able to manage our way through storms, droughts, rising sea levels, and mass extinction of species. This is our challenge. This is your challenge. And primarily, this is a challenge for our children. Hertsgaard posits the double imperative of the challenge. We have to adapt to living through global warming, even as we work to halt and reverse it. That is, we have to prepare for the effects of climate change while we make the deep emissions cuts necessary to mitigate climate change. Mitigation requirements are well known. An economy-wide price on carbon, vast increases in energy efficiency, especially insulation in Minnesota, huge investments in clean energy technology, and our exercise of everyday ethics to protect creation. So much of the resources, knowledge, and technology necessary to adapt and mitigate currently exist. But the ability to adapt to climate change depends as much on social factors, public attitudes, cultural habits, political tendencies, economic interests. I wouldn't be here, literally, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think we can succeed in doing this and lead our communities in doing so. As a community of faith, we can understand and provide the spirit behind the changes in cultural mores and attitudes that will get us through the political and economic obstacles. God is still speaking. In Deuteronomy, we hear God say, "Choose life so that you and your dependents may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying God, and holding fast to God." My take home from this sermon is to have the talk with people in your family, home, and neighborhood. Now, you may know that Kelly Raymer is helping Heidi and me with the confirmation class. Kelly has brought to us a wake-up program that is helping the confirmation class and Heidi and me understand the challenges that they face and that they have the power to do something about those challenges. They can take action. An adult version is available for you. It's time to do whatever you can to maximize younger folks' understanding of global warming and practice the talk in front of a mirror a few times before you give it. That person in the mirror may teach you something. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying God, and holding fast to God. May it be so.